Hey guys, so with the new synthesized implicit on weapons, I thought I could revisit spell poison builds and see if those new implicits make spell poison at least half viable. And while I did defeat tier 8 Elder and his guidance pretty easily, and Shaper's guidance were not really an issue, however, Shaper fight was not very pleasant, and in the end I just came to conclusion that these mods are still not enough to make spell poison decent. I will also briefly talk about this build, but actually I want to explain why spell poison is so much worse than attack poison. It is a bit complicated topic to explain because wording in PoE is very important, so I will just try to simplify it. A first important thing to note is that initial hit damage and ailment damage, like poison damage, is calculated separately. For example, spell damage would improve initial hit damage but would not improve the poison damage. Same goes for attacks. So that's the same thing, but when you look at passive skill tree, the way you scale poison damage is through hair's damage, poison damage, damage over time, or increased damage with ailments. And guess what? Only attacks have increased damage with ailments. So let's say you are playing with claw, attack, poison build, and from the passive skill tree you will be taking most of the claw nodes, and every single claw node which gives physical damage with claws will also give ailment damage with claws. Same goes for any other weapon type, and for spells, nothing, absolutely nothing, not a single node which would increase ailment damage, because spells are not tied to the weapon that you are using, and there are no nodes that would, for example, increase spell damage and also increase ailment damage with spells. And if you are doing elemental poison build, for example fire poison build using fire version of Volkur's guidance gloves, of course you could increase your poison damage by scaling the fire damage. However, those gloves also have 50% less poison duration, which means it would be harder to stack more poison stacks. It is also not possible to get full conversion from elemental damage into hairs, so elemental poison will always be at a disadvantage. Now let's compare popular poison attack skills and poison spell skills. Molten Strike is pretty popular for attack poison build, despite having conversion into elemental, and let's compare it with the Firestorm, which used to be one of the most popular skills for poison. The main difference between attack scaling and poison scaling is that attack scale of your weapon base damage, and attacks with level scale damage effectiveness, while spells with level just give more base damage, and damage effectiveness remains the same no matter level 1 or level 20 gem. So when we look at the numbers, we see that Molten Strike has damage effectiveness up to 161%, and projectiles from Molten Strike deals around 88% of the initial hit damage, and the base damage comes from your weapon. And nowadays it is pretty easy to get over 400 physical DPS one-handed weapons. Now let's look at the Firestorm. Firestorm has damage effectiveness of only 30%, and level 20 Firestorm deals between 200 and 300 damage, and of course it hits multiple times just like Molten Strike. So on average you have a base damage of 250 at only 30% damage effectiveness, while with the Molten Strike you have a base damage of around 400 plus and damage effectiveness of around 88%. But for Firestorm to poison you even need Volkur gloves, which also reduces your poison duration, or you need 2 consuming dark daggers plus Infernal Mantle, and even then you would only have 75% conversion from fire into hairs, which means you would lose another 25% of your base damage, which means on average your Firestorm would have around 187 base damage. And of course Molten Strike does have conversion into fire, but even with that you would still have over 160 base damage for projectiles. And remember, Molten Strike has better damage effectiveness, and on the passive skill tree you do take weapon nodes which would increase the ailment damage. I know this may sound a bit complicated, and I hope I didn't do any serious calculation mistakes, and this is just one of the examples comparison between attack and spells, but I hope this will be enough to give you at least some understanding why spells and attack poison are so different, and spell poison is just straight up outdated. I can only guess that GG does not have enough time and doesn't give enough priority for spell poisons to be fixed, but I do hope that hopefully maybe next league it will be improved. So now let me very briefly talk about the build that I'm doing here. Unleash bladefall and unleash blade vortex with poison. Unleash of course is a bit maybe even silly, but it just changes the way you play it. When I unleash bladefall, I stack up to 14 poison stacks on a single target. Without unleash I would have big mana issues, so of course this could be done without unleash, but you would have to build around having more mana regen, and of course you would have to stand still and cast more, which may also put you in more danger. Also Also in the clips you will see me whirling blade through enemies without stopping basically, and that's because I have Unleash Blade Vortex as well, and I like this setup more than I thought I would. Click Unleash Blade Vortex, get 4 stacks, continue whirling blade through enemies. I also have Circle of Nostalgia unique ring, which improves my Herald of Agony buff effect, which gives me more chance to poison and more poison damage, and also it does increase hair's damage while affected by Herald of Agony. So Herald of Agony is just for the buff and nothing else. Then I have the Embalmer gloves with temp chain on hit. Temporal chain increases the poison duration, and it is very much needed because I am using 2 weapons with the new implicits, and I hate this wording so much. Poisons you inflict deal damage up to 20% faster. In short, I just call it faster poisons. And these mods actually do not change the damage per poison over the duration, but it does change the poison DPS, damage per second. In short, you deal the same amount of damage as without these mods, but you deal that damage a bit faster, over a shorter duration. So one of the weapon is with the essence crafted. It gives decay on a hit, dealing 500 damage per second for 8 seconds, which is also scaled by the non-ailment hair's damage over time multiplier. God, I hate that wording as well. And on both weapons I either tried to get poison duration, damage with poison, and crafted hair's damage. Since decay doesn't stack, my second weapon is without a decay, and I just crafted, well, I guess a bit better weapon with mana regen, attack speed, which I needed for whirling blades, damage with poison, and of course, like I said, hair's damage. I even crafted belt with hair's damage and increased damage with ailments. And on jewels I also got increased poison duration along with chance to poison, which I also needed. And the rest of the items are just rares with life and resistances. And for flask I am using Coralito's signature flask. Basically improves the poison duration, which adds a lot of damage per poison but not damage per second. The flask was also needed to cover my chance to poison for bladefall. Another flask is Atziri's promise for physical damage as extra chaos, which does add quite a lot of damage and also gives me a bit of leech, which I kind of need. And lastly, sulfur flask to remove curse and just to give generic increased damage, and then 2 life flasks. But you could also use Sin's Rebirth flask, which does give Unholy Might, which does give an extra hair's damage. But since I don't really have any good life sustain, I don't want to run with just 1 life flask. Now for the gem and links, of course I'm using Malevolence and Herald of Agony. Wither Totem of course. Now the bladefall setup, I am using Deadly Ailments, Wild Toxins, Unleash, Spell Cascade, and Unbound Ailments. Now Unleash and Spell Cascade may be debatable, but I compared the numbers for Spell Cascade and without it. Without Spell Cascade I apply around 6 to 8 poison stacks, and with Spell Cascade I apply around 13 to 14 poison stacks. And the combined DPS is very similar, but with Spell Cascade I also cover more AoE, so I just kept the Spell Cascade. Instead of Spell Cascade I would probably use Void Manipulation, which would give a lot more damage per poison, but of course I would apply less poison stacks per Unleash. And Wild Blade Vortex is inside the gloves, which also adds level 20 Wild Toxins, and it is linked with Unleash, Poison, and Deadly Ailments. And I was using this setup mostly for the clear speed. And for map bosses, I drop Wither Totems, I click free of my damaging flasks, use Wild Blade Vortex, unleash Bladefall once, and wait for like 2 or 3 seconds for boss to die. And this setup works pretty well for map bosses, but anything that doesn't die fast enough is a bit of an issue. Unleash also means you lose DPS if you have to continuously keep casting. For example, in Delve in Val cities, it's pretty dangerous. All enemies are attacking from all places. You don't really have leech. It's just not pleasant. But of course this is just my build. I just really wanted to play with Unleash and this setup. Also, clearing red tier maps doesn't seem to be any different when clearing yellow tier maps. The difference is only bossing. Tier 16 bosses are, well, Shaper's Gardens are way harder, but I wouldn't say that it was that bad. So I can't say that it is completely bad, but it's definitely still not in a good spot. Obviously you can invest a lot more currency and push the damage a bit higher, but for the same investment you could do so many other builds and way easier. For the passive skill tree, not gonna talk it, I will include as always links in video description with path of building import code, but just to quickly mention that it is Trickster and not Assassin. Trickster is faster and more defensive, I guess, less mana issues, and Assassin you would have to go crit, you would have to stack power charges. In my opinion, Assassin just needs a rework. It's like a glass cannon but kind of without the cannon part, so it's mostly just the glass. Anyway, that's all for this video. I haven't decided my next build yet. I don't really like replaying old builds, and there are certain things that I recently did, certain things that I don't want to do at all. So with each league I feel more and more stuck, not being able to decide what build to do, but I'll figure out something. So thank you for watching and I'll see you soon.